Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the newest episode of the Introduction Podcast. Today we have an awesome guest. Justin, please tell us more about yourself and why should people listen?
Sure. Hey, Nick. My name is Justin Lahullier. I'm currently the CIO and CISO for Delta Dental in New Jersey and Connecticut. We are a dental insurance company located in New Jersey, serving both New Jersey and Connecticut headquartered companies or individuals. We also sell a couple other ancillary lines of insurance, including vision, hearing, and we're working on expanding that portfolio. But I've been in at Delta Dental for over a quarter of a century. It's hard to say that now, but across several roles in the company. The last role being the CIO,
Mm-hmm.
I took that role about 7 years ago, where really it's been all about transformation. So transforming the traditional IT order taker mentality to more of a consultative resource within the organization. And then obviously taking advantage of new advanced technology, whether it be moving to the cloud, building out our data and analytics capabilities, or now finding where we're going to apply Gen AI inside the organization. So always considered myself someone in the company that been involved in change. I think I say every 5 or 6 years, I got the itch to do something different in the organization, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do that. So most of my career has been about driving change in a highly regulated organization, which is always fun.
This is very interesting to hear your insights because most of the transformation stories that we see out there in the market is a new person comes in with a new vision. Because like every time where there is a new technology, the people that were driving the old technology, they tend to be locked into it. They have too much ties and connections to it. So it's very hard for them to transform and adapt. And right now, when we see that the organizations are shifting themselves with this AI and every side of the business is changing with AI. Most of the companies, they prefer to hire somebody new who has the vision, who maybe has a fresh glance at things, and that will be driving this forward. So I'm curious about your story. What does it cost you to be in the company for like quarter of the decade, as you said, and be the leader of this change? What are you giving up in order to be constantly on the edge?
I think it's not something new. I think one of the things I learned early on in my career was really to stay kind of at the tip of the spear on what's coming out, what people are doing, not only in my industry and other industries, and try to bring that back into the organization. We used to even had our building is kind of green glass on the outside. And I used to say, we have a green glass risk. We have a risk that everyone only knows what's inside the green glass building and they never go
Uh-huh.
outside, and then bring that back into the organization. So, my focus has been both for myself and trying to coach and have my team bring things in from the outside, challenge the norms. Now that brings with its own challenges, right? So I think lots of times I'm having to educate folks inside the company on what's possible,
Hmm.
showing them what's possible, doing a lot of proof of value. So spending a lot of time bringing people along is probably the biggest cost. I think anytime you're dealing with a new technology, whether it be Gen AI or something prior to that, you really have to put in the time up front to educate the folks that this is going to impact, whether it be the executives or the end users who are ultimately going to touch the technology,
Hmm.
so that they're bought in and they understand the technology that you're trying to introduce into the organization.
Okay, makes sense. What about, so whenever you go and you try to do a transformation in the organization, you are publicly saying that most of the people do it wrong. So for example, if you sit down and you start optimizing existing processes, well, that's probably not a transformation really. It's not really creating a new value, because when you're transforming something, the way that I understand this, if there is a process of a new value creation, for rethinking the way of not how we just do this process, but like, do we actually need to do this process? Maybe it was relevant 5 years ago. Maybe right now we don't have to do this because environment changed, regulation changed, and now is this process just a redundancy. So instead of going and optimizing it, we can just rethink the whole thing, how this whole machine works, and we can just cut the process out because this thing will be done automatically by, I don't know, an AI agent that will be constantly checking the status somewhere. So when was the moment that you clearly understood this difference between we actually don't need optimize everything, we just need to create new value? When was the moment, and how can you tell to, for the viewers and for the listeners that are listening to this, how can they evaluate their own situation to understand, are they actually just optimizing or are they actually creating new value?
Yeah, I don't know when the exact moment was, but I think, for me, it's a reflection moment on, and I probably started on myself. So, looking at workflows that I, as a younger worker in the organization, did every day and saying, like, do I really need to be doing this? Is there a way I might automate this? What's the objective of what we're trying to do, right? So I think it started with myself, disrupting myself. And then from there, it became something that I could apply both first to my department and then ultimately to the organization. So I think it really is, taking a look in the mirror, I always say, and saying, let's understand what we want to achieve first. I think that's pivotal. What is the objective of this thing? Sometimes the objective doesn't even matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago, someone said we have to do this because of why, and why doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think really understanding what you want to accomplish first. And then, yes, I think you have to greenfield now, today, with the new technologies and say, if this is the thing we want to achieve ultimately, how might we do that today? Not optimize how we did it yesterday, because a lot of the technologies that we used yesterday either can get in the way or cause today's technologies to be more expensive. So can we take a look at it and greenfield it? Couple examples of where we've done that internally. One about 3 or 4 years ago, when we were looking to kind of modernize our data warehouse, we had a traditional kind of SQL Server, SSIS package stack that we built with Accenture a decade
Mm-hmm.
ago, and really challenging the team to say, let's do this totally different. Like, we understand what we want to get to in the end. And we ended up building out our new warehouse in BigQuery with the data lake concept, and very different to
Mm-hmm.
a SQL Server developer to put them and say, all right, now I want you to learn this new technology in this new place and do things differently. But ultimately, the outcome got us to a better place. We run more efficiently, we can do more things, really set us up for the whole Gen AI explosion, because
Mm-hmm.
now we have a good curated data set on a modern technology stack. So that one was an example. And then another one we just did, we're rewriting a portion of our system for our electronic eligibility consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and the traditional system is a Microsoft stack, .NET, SQL Server, et cetera, and kind of taking that, moving it to Cloud Run, with a Alloy DB back, and kind of thinking more of an event-driven process. So
Mm-hmm.
change people's minds completely. And listen, it's not an easy thing to do. I think it challenges the teams, but I think a lot of that is leaders telling teams, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is when you grow as an individual and as an organization. So I think that's kind of been the motto I've tried to use with my team, and those are some examples of where we've done that recently.
I really liked what you said about an alignment. So you first align it within yourself was an objective, then you translate it to the team, and then you translate it to the thing that you're applying your force. Like first you need to create the force in yourself, and then you find the object where to apply that force. I'm curious about the job of a CIO. What assumptions have you changed since the Gen AI started really knocking on the door? Because I imagine like it changed a ton in the last decade, the
Yeah.
way that you approach work, the way that you think about work, the way that you think about evaluating your work.
Yeah, I think, well, one, I'm not a traditional CIO. So, I became, the first time I worked in IT was as a CIO. Prior to that, I worked in strategy running our data and analytics group, but it was under the business side of things. And I'm not traditionally trained or educated in computer science. So I'm not a traditional CIO, but I think, one thing I wanted to bring in when I took the role over was really moving from that traditional kind of order taker legacy mentality, we're the custodians of the systems mentality, to no, we're the consultative experts. We are the people who have to show people what's possible,
Hmm.
bring people into the know and help them understand what they can do today versus what they could do yesterday. So I think, that is just a different paradigm when I took the role back 7 years ago. And then I think that's helped me with the Gen AI movement, being able to use some of those same thinking patterns to
Hmm.
apply to, how do we take this new technology now that's very disruptive and get our folks to start to apply it in different places. And I think one of the benefits was I could see that early on. I think I saw it much earlier than a lot of my other CIOs I talked to, because, recognizing the impact it could have in business,
Hmm.
and was able to get in front of that, set up our governance, get everything kind of set up, and have our folks in a safe environment, being able to utilize, play with, learn that technology way
And
before.
prepared for the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's very cool. But I mean, look, the elephant in the room is very simple that building AI practice in a software business and in your highly regulated environment where you're like a dental insurer and you have a ton of different things around you and very strict governance and policy and all of that stuff, it's very hard. Like your job is way harder than building AI in a very relaxed environment where it's all about just business outcomes, where you have a lot of regulations. And a lot of our clients, where we talk with, banking, finance, healthcare, insurers, payers, they have the same thing, and they struggle a lot. So how do you see it in your eyes? What are the main blockers that you see in your own environment? What is creating the most friction for you that you think, man, like if that thing didn't exist, we would be 10 times more faster?
Yeah, and for me, it's twice as bad because I'm also the CISO. Many times I have the security hat on as well and looking at risk. But
Hmm.
I think, in our regulated industries, the most important thing is really educating folks on what the truth is around these technologies. I think early on with the Gen AI, especially, this technology moves so fast. Every 2 to 3 months, it's, changing immensely. And so,
Hmm.
in January, someone's talking about hallucination and how that might affect it. By June, most of that problem can be solved, through different techniques and capabilities. So a lot of what I've had to, in a regulated industry is both educate my executive team, mostly the audit, the risk, the legal folks about where the technology is. Also, having conversations with our legislators and the government officials that are looking at, introducing different types of legislation around AI is another role we play in a regulated industry. So helping my legal team understand that. So when they're going to talk to legislators
Hmm.
and to folks at the state and federal level, having them understand what we can do safely versus what's still kind of probably not appropriate for a highly regulated industry. One of the things we adopted very early on was human in the loop on all of this. We don't have the luxury of having, error. An error in our system can result in a very bad result for one of our patients or
100%.
providers. And so we make sure there's always a human in the loop on any type of adverse decision that's being made when we're using AI. I think
Hmm.
that served us very well because the technology is still not totally mature. So I think it's very important to have that. I think we set up a lot of systems that take the friction out of someone having to use a lot of cognitive energy on, like, should I put this in the chatbot or shouldn't I put this in the chatbot? Is this PHI or isn't this PHI? And so we were able to partner with some companies early on to build filtering, on the back end so that they could put whatever they wanted into our AI assets. We were running algorithms in the background and identifying if there was PII or PHI and either masking that or redacting it. And
Hmm.
then when the information came back, rehydrating it. So our end users were kind of not having to have that cognitive load of worrying about it and getting used to using the technology and what it could do, et cetera.
Much brain power you saved.
Yeah, because in the early days, and we see this a lot with a lot of early technology, the vendors don't want to put the technology under their business associate agreements or say it's HIPAA compliant. And so
Hmm.
we have to find ways to kind of make sure our data stays safe and secure, but also get our people to have hands on the technology. So when it gets mature enough and these companies are ready to say, we have a HIPAA, certified product and we're ready to get into a BAA, that they're not starting from zero. They already understand the technology. Getting people into a safe environment, removing the friction and the cognitive load of them having to worry all the time about, can I put something in here or can I put something in here, I think was key. I also think, very honestly, one of the early things I recognized is we need to get a safe environment stood up so our users could use it, because this is such an impactful technology that people will go use it on their own.
Yeah.
Anyone with a mobile phone or whatnot can.
Just pull up the cloud and Google it there. Yeah.
And it's a little bit of whack-a-mole if you want to block this stuff in your organization. There's different products you can put all, but it's such a big ecosystem and there's so many ways. So rather than that, let's educate people and give them someplace safe where they can
Hmm.
learn and use the technology. And that served us very well.
Okay. What does it look like when? So you partially mentioned this in replying to the previous question. So my question is also going to be about it. What does it look like when you have an AI that is doing, I don't know, let's say claims processing or eligibility processing, and then it your AI is trained on data that you have gave to it, you maybe the SOPs and other data points, and then this AI hits an exception. And because I don't know, usually something is confusing. So in that moment, that goes to the human, right? Because the human is in the loop and they're basically seeing a weird case, and then the human is making the decision where the AI cannot make a decision. It's usually very hard to capture the data of how that human is making the decision. Like this is usually where most of the organization really lag, because that works as a natural barrier for any kind of AI implementation in the organization. Because if your AI can only work on simple cases where there is a lot of data, that's fine, but it cannot really process middle or hard complexity cases because it always gives out the control back, right? So how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's early days. We have not looked to kind of fully automate that whole process yet, both from a regulatory perspective. We're not ready to do that. And I don't think the systems are ready to do it. But you make a good point in, how do you gather that systemic intelligence that you need to ultimately either provide within context or train a model on in order to do that similar job, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's a very delicate area because a lot of that involves speaking to your top employees that do that job today, to extract that information out from them, either through traditional processes like interviewing and talking to folks and watching what they're doing, or new processes where you can run these clients on people's machines that kind of watch what they do all day and kind of build the context of what someone's trying to do. That can be very scary for an employee. So I
Yeah,
think
because it can backfire, right? You
right.
think about
Well,
that?
or they could think my job's in jeopardy. I'm teaching the AI to take my job. So, it's early days for us, but we take a human in the middle, kind of human first, employee first approach. So,
Mhm.
a lot of training and letting people know, like, we're not looking to displace people from their job. We're looking to take some of the workload that they may do every day that's less valuable and have them focus on more valuable things. So what you called out's a perfect example, right? If 70% of the time we can follow our standard rule sets and be relatively confident that something can be done by AI, let's let it do that. For the
Mhm.
other 30%, let's let our humans be the humans they are and be good at it and evaluate it and provide that human level of knowledge and making a decision. And then obviously for any place where there might be an adverse determination, like where a claim might be denied or downgraded or something, we absolutely want a human in there validating that,
Mhm.
because again, it's still early days on this stuff.
Yeah, 100%. You do not want the person that has 10, 15 years of experience solving like complex. They're an expert. They're the boss of that process or that area. You don't want them to be spending time on clicking a button on simple cases.
And we talk a lot about this in our business functions, like processing a claim, but the same thing applies to our software developers,
Mhm.
right? And we're going through the same disruption internally in our IT department with our
Mhm.
software developers as the business is going through it, their claims processes or eligibility processes, and saying, hey, we don't want you to have to spend all your time writing line by line code. We want you to be kind of supervising a coding agent and then helping solve the hard problems, thinking about the architecture. So we're struggling with the same problems in IT that the business is struggling with. So it's a universal disruption is what I see.
Interesting. You also wrote about the 90% AI cost reduction predictions, and you really pushed back on the idea that the cheaper compute will automatically produce better outcomes for everyone. So, how does it look like from the CIO perspective whenever you have an AI initiative and it's not really producing yet or not producing at all? Like the cost reduction is not materializing yet. How are you holding the program in place together? How do you still keep the thing moving forward?
One, I think we as technology leaders have to be very careful about always kind of saying, if we throw this technology at something, we'll solve the problem, regardless of how cheap or not cheap it is, right? So that's the first tenet I'm always saying is like, we can't always say we can solve everyone's problem with technology. I think secondarily, we force our business users to kind of think through a 2-page business case before we touch anything or build anything with them and just say like, all right, here's what things look like today. What if we do this the right way? If we're able to apply this technology the right way, what do we think they could look like tomorrow? And what's that equate to? Better quality, a savings in time or a cost reduction, whatever it might be. And then do a proof of value to say, all right, let's build this out and kind of test it with a small group of people, see if we're seeing that result. And then if we see that result, let's scale it, right? And
Mhm.
so we try to kill off those projects that aren't going to show the value very early on,
Mhm.
so they don't make it, because what happens is it becomes someone's baby and then they don't want to give up their baby, right?
Yeah.
Regardless whether it's saving money or not. especially these days, because if you build something with AI, you might be able to be on a podcast, or, you can post about it, or in the Delta Dental system, people want to know what you're doing. And it's like, but if that thing is not actually doing what it's intended to do, it's really not a success. So we
Mhm.
try to weed those or kill those off very early so that they don't become coveted kind of babies that then are harder to get rid of. And that's worked well for us.
Okay. Interesting approach. I have never heard that before, but that's very cool. How are you thinking about governance? So you wrote also about the governance that it should have ROI baked into it. You need to absolutely, like, for new initiatives, they need to be, they don't have just to look cool or be a cool technology. They actually have to put the money back into the pocket or close the leak where it's leaking right now. So what kind of change in behavior have you seen once you implemented that?
Yeah. So on our governance side, I think it's really important when you have a governance committee, or however you want to manage your governance around AI, that they're exposed to not only kind of the legal and risk side of things, but the
Hmm.
actual application of the technology. And so we
Hmm.
spend a lot of time with our governance committee bringing these use cases in front of them, showing them the business case, showing them what we developed, whether it was a success or not, and educating them on that process. Because I do think it's super important to make sure upfront, it's got to be a partnership between technology and business. And part of that partnership is kind of putting in the work up front and saying, like,
Hmm.
here's the thing we want to solve, and here's what we're going to measure success on. We've got to sit down and say, here's the architecture we're going to build, and here's how we're going to measure the success of that architecture. Having that partnership, and ultimately being honest with one another along the way to be able to say, like, this isn't working out. And it's not always just stop and fail. We learn something along the way every time. And then we put that into the next iteration, or we may pivot and try something different. But I think highly iterative, very transparent process between the business and technology early on is what's key. Otherwise, again, I think you sometimes get into these, huge projects that in the end get deployed. And, you hear about the MIT studies that say, 80 or 90% of AI projects fail. And I think that's because people become emotionally attached to the project,
Hmm.
and instead of being emotionally attached to the outcome, which is what's ultimately aligned to our strategy as a company and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. What about compliance? So I've heard a lot of CIOs in healthcare specifically. They say that the compliance doesn't want to move faster with AI. Like, they want to move faster, but compliance is like a roadblock. So I'm curious how much of that conversation is really, a real compliance problem of a new AI tool or initiative, or just the fact that it's very hard to make decisions for compliance teams on new AI tools because, I don't know, they're lacking some. There may be an understanding, maybe it's certainty, maybe something else.
It's not AI is not the one off. Like, we went through this early in the cloud explosion, right? Like, early on when cloud just became a thing, anyone who wanted to migrate a workload to the cloud, there was tons of compliance loops you had to jump through. Same with some of the SaaS vendors out there when they started to pop up. I've had instances in my career where I spent a year negotiating contracts with vendors, with my
Hmm.
compliance team, right?
Hmm.
This is not a new thing. It's a new technology. Rightfully, early on, there was a lot of conversations about things like hallucination or data leakage, et cetera, which makes folks very nervous.
Hmm.
So I think, rightfully so, with new technologies, we have to tread very, like, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? We can't be careless with the data we have from our customers. So I think optimally you have a team where your legal team, your compliance team, your AI team are working together and being progressive, and not putting their head in the sand and saying, like, we can't touch this, we can't use this, because that's the opposite that I see.
Hmm.
I have other peers that I work with or that I talk to that have said, like, oh, we don't even have Microsoft Copilot rolled out yet. How are you doing all the stuff you're doing? And I think that does a disservice to everyone. It does a
Yeah.
disservice to the legal and compliance team because they're not learning more about the technology. It does a disservice to the technical team because they're not skilling up, and then obviously to the business. And I don't know. There's a lot of talk now that that gap is becoming so big that
Hmm.
from a competitive perspective, you may not be able to catch up if you haven't started already.
Yes.
And if your competitors are doing it, you're putting yourself in a very difficult situation. That said, in a regulated industry, the other factor that we have a little control over through, talking to regulators and all is federal and state compliance. And I think we're starting to see more of that come through. That will have a big effect on things we're already doing and things we want to do in the future. But whether you're in banking and finance or you're in healthcare or insurance, we're used to that
Hmm.
from past experiences anyway.
Yeah, about the study that you said where it's like 90 or 9 or 95% of AI pilots are failing. I've heard a different opinion there that it's not important that they're failing. What's important that another 5 or 10% are making it. And those companies that do make it, that know how to implement it, they are gaining a huge competitive advantage. And then they can just kill, the other 90%.
And failing isn't always bad.
Exactly. It's learning. Yeah, they're not failing, they're learning.
You may have to fail 3 or 4 times before you have your first success. So yeah, I agree with that. I totally
100%. What do you think is so if we take a mid-market company in healthcare who is just starting to think about AI, let's say they got the green lights from internal teams. They say, okay, now we need AI like yesterday. So what is the single investment that they're probably missing out on? Because I mean, you clearly had a lot of different AI projects. So I'm trying to see if there is one single thing that is at the beginning and the root at the stem of every success that you had in your practice. So if you would end up an episode with a or an advice to the person that is trying to think about AI, Justin, what would be the one thing that I should be focusing on in my AI initiatives to go well?
I think you just have to be careful about, trying to sprint before you walk and run. So we spent a lot of time educating our folks on what is possible, getting the hands on keyboards with the technology, and then infusing that cross collaborating. Like we do AI hours every 3 weeks in our company. We have over 100, we have more than 2/3 of our company joins those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And we have practitioners, so not IT people, someone in provider relations or someone in legal or somewhere in finance demoing what they're doing with the technology or what they're building with us. So it's coming
Mm-hmm.
from them, it's building cross pollination, and people are getting excited about it. They have ownership of it. It's not an IT shoving technology down your throat project. They're engaged. I think that's the single biggest success I think we've had, and I'm doubling down on that. We're just getting ready to run another enterprise training type of activity across the company,
Mm-hmm.
agents and things of that sort. So yeah, to me, educating folks and getting the buy-in early is the most important thing, because the technology, and I hate to say this, I always say this to my team, the technology is the easy part now. Anyone with a credit card can buy this technology, and now Claude can write it for you most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
People are the hard part. Culture is the hard part. So making sure you get the people and culture thing right up front is going to pay off in dividends later down.
100%, because this creates, I love it. Again, I also never heard it from anyone with this initiative, because it creates a good amount of FOMO where you see that your peers are using this cool thing and they're thinking about solving this repetitive problem, and AI now just does it for them. It gives like an itch, and like the more itches they have, the more itches they see, they start to kind of do those things themselves. And that creates like one very special culture where, the change and adaptation is normal, where before coming up with a problem to your manager, you just go and you maybe think how to solve that problem yourself, because now your capabilities have increased significantly. You can build the solution yourself even, and then you can just suggest it to somebody internally.
Yeah.
Great.
I think for us, it was, like I said, getting those safe products in the hands of our users,
Mm-hmm.
a relatively frictionless experience so that they could go build things.
Mm-hmm.
And now, them talking to one another. And sometimes, someone in sales might not be comfortable with reaching out to IT for help, but they can reach out to that person who demoed something from a department next to them,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing more and more of that. So it's been a huge success for us.
This is amazing. I think that's awesome advice. Thank you so much for sharing your time, expertise with me and the viewers. If anybody wants to get in touch with you and ask some additional questions or just ask about your successes, what's the best place to reach you?
I think I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, so feel free to reach out in a message there. And I'm also on Twitter as well. So those are probably the best ways. Just send a message along, and when I have a chance, I'll certainly respond.
Justin is very responsive, so you guys are in good hands. Thank you so much. It was a great episode.
Thanks, Nick.